Our next speaker is Dave James. He is the Executive Director for the Alliance for Biblical Integrity. He is a veteran missionary here in Eastern Europe. He established the Word of Life Bible Institute in Hungary, and he's still a international speaker, travels all around the world to teach at various Bible institutes all over the place. So he will be speaking on the angelic fall and the flood, a huge topic. He'll be taking two sessions actually. So the first one will take for 55 minutes, then take a short break, and then we'll wrap it up in the next session and take questions and answers from there. So Dave, let her rip.
Yeah, well, thank you, Paul. It's great to be with you, and I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this series of seminars on cosmology, and it's a very important topic, and certainly one, as our viewers know, one that causes a lot of controversy, and there are a lot of different opinions. And of course, all of the topics are very important, and all of them are much bigger than the speakers can really do appropriately in the allotted time. But we have what we have, and we're going to try to get through this. And as you said, this is a big topic, and trying to even do it in two sessions. We'll see how it goes. I've taught the topic before in various formats, but not quite in this particular format and in a two-session format. So we'll see how it goes. I don't know if we're going to end early or we're going to need to cut off and leave time for questions. We'll see how it goes. And the last couple of sections that I have, we can drop off if we need to. So we'll see how it goes. And welcome to our viewers from all over the world. Those who are watching us live, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And for those who are watching the archived version, we're glad that you found us and are able to join us. As Paul said, my ministry is the Alliance for Biblical Integrity. And I've actually put a PDF version of this seminar on the Alliance for Biblical Integrity website, so you can go to it if you want to download it. If you want to have that beside you, I will have it up on the screen with this screen share, but you can download it either now or for future reference. You can go to biblicalintegrity.org, and then under courses and seminars, it's the second subject, Angelic Fall and the Flood, and then that will take you to this page, and you can download the PDF version there. So hopefully that will be helpful for you and maybe give you a resource for future reference. So we're going to get into this topic right away, the angelic fall and the flood, and it definitely fits into the matter of cosmology because it has to do with the creation of the angels, the timing of that, the fall of the angels, how that relates to the flood, what in the world is going on in Genesis chapter 6, which is a topic of a lot of discussion and debate and various opinions, and even some more recent discussions that have tried to put a different spin on it than even has been done historically, and then how this all plays into not only the past, but does it have any effect in the present, and even touching on how it might have some effect in the future, although we won't spend very much time there at all. So the crux of the issue begins in Genesis chapter 6, and so I will just read the first 5 verses. Now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. This is the New King James Version, by the way. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So again, what in the world is going on there? So I thought that I would start by just quickly going through the major issues that we'll be dealing with. So this is just a basic overview of where we will be going, some of the questions, the issues that I think we need to discuss to one degree or another, some more in depth than others, but things that really come to bear on this entire matter. So a first question is the identity of the sons of God. Who are the sons of God? There are different views, and we'll be talking about that. What is the identity of the daughters of men? And because of the internet connection, you probably won't be seeing the transitions between the PowerPoints, and in fact, I may be moving at some points faster than the internet connection is able to keep up. So again, you'll have the PowerPoint in PDF format if you want to go ahead and download that while we're moving ahead. So the identity of the daughters of men. What is the nature of the sin involved there in Genesis chapter 6? What about the identity of the Nephilim? Now in the King James Version, in the New King James Version, it's down there in verse 4, I believe, verse 4 or 5, and it's translated as giants in the King James Version and the New King James Version, and we'll be discussing this. Who are the giants of those days, the men of renown? And then what about the relative timing of the angels' creation? That does play into this, as does the fall, even in Genesis chapter 3, the relative timing of the angels' creation in Genesis chapter 1, and how that may affect how we understand angelology and the angelic fall and the flood in the bigger issue, the bigger subject of cosmology. What was the scope of the angels' fall? How many angels were involved of those angels who were created? What is the reason and purpose for the flood? There are some questions about this, and it's related to the nature of the sin and what was going on when the sons of God went into the daughters of men. How did that contribute, and to what degree did it contribute to the flood itself? Why God chose to judge the entire world by flood? What are the consequences of the judgment, both for men, and then depending on the identity of the sons of God and the daughters of men, how does that relate to those individuals? Then, if we have time, we'll get to the book of Enoch, which is an apocryphal book written starting about estimated around 300 BC, a book that is not included in the English Bible, but it is actually included. The only full text, as I understand it, the only full text we have of the book of Enoch is actually in the language of Ethiopia, and it's included in the canon of the Church of Ethiopia. And then the question of fallen angels versus demons. This is not a huge topic, but it is an issue that some people discuss. Are they the same? And if they're not, who are the demons? So we'll touch on that if we have time. So the angelic fall and the flood. What is the relative timing of the creation of the angels? This is a debated, a discussed topic in creationism. It does touch on the matter of old earth creationism versus young earth creationism, and I know that in the course of these seminars this is being discussed, this matter of old earth versus new earth creationism. I am coming at this from the standpoint of a young earth creationist, that in the relative recent past, and I would put that somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago, between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago, probably more in the neighborhood of 6 or 7, but that's a big issue in and of itself. But at any rate, I'm a young earth creationist, believing in a relatively recent creation as opposed to millions or billions of years ago. And I also hold to a 6 literal 24-hour day creation, that all that is created, the heavens and the earth, were created in those 6 24-hour days in the relatively recent past. So Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then the next verse is the earth was without form and void. Let me back to that. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void. Now, old earth creationists, those who would place millions or billions of years for the age of the creation, many would place a gap of an indeterminate length of time between those two verses. I would not hold that. I would say that verse 1, my understanding would be that verse 1 is a summary statement, and then leading into verse 2. And so the question is, when did verse 1 take place, the creation of the heavens and the earth, in relation to the creation of the angels, or how do they fit into that? If you go to the book of Job in chapter 38, of course, understand in the book of Job that God is challenging Job. Job has developed some issues because of the suffering that God has allowed in his life. We don't have time to get into that, of course, but as God is pushing back on Job in chapter 38, God poses this question to Job: where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. And then he goes on to say in verse 6, to what were its foundations fastened, meaning the foundations of the earth, the basic form of the earth, or who laid its cornerstone? And then he makes this interesting statement: when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Now, this is one of the few times, and we'll talk about this, is one of the few times when the sons of God are mentioned. So you have a parallelism going on here. The morning stars and the sons of God, I believe these are the same beings, created beings, and the sons of God, I would suggest, are the angelic beings. So if God established the foundations of the earth in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, and the morning stars, the sons of God, the angelic beings, shouted for joy when they saw the foundations of the earth, then that seems to suggest necessarily that the angels, being spirit beings, are part of the creation of the heavens. So there is a distinction in Genesis 1, the creation of the heavens and the creation of the earth. And so I would place the creation of the angels under that broad idea of the creation of the heavens. So they were part of that, and God, perhaps in the next instant, or at least within that 24-day period or 24-hour day period, God laid the foundations for the earth. And so, as newly created beings, the sons of God shouted for joy as they were astounded. This is their first experience as newly created living beings, singing the majesty and the power of God as he brings into being the entire, I would say, the entire physical universe. Then, as we think about Job chapter 1, same book, going back to it, it's another place, one of the actually only 4 places in the Word of God where the phrase sons of God, B'nai Elohim, is used. Genesis chapter 6, Job 38, and here in Job chapter 1, and then in the next chapter. Now, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also among them. So the sons of God and Satan seem to be in the same class of being. Then in chapter 2, again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. So this is the second series of tests and trials that Job is going through. So there's this emphasis on this matter of the sons of God, and I would suggest that the way it's phrased in chapter 1 and 2 of Job, that Satan and the sons of God are in the same class of beings, meaning angelic beings. Satan being a cherub. Then, relating to Satan himself as one of the created angelic beings, we see in Ezekiel 28 that there is a lamentation, an oracle, a prophecy leveled against the king of Tyre. Now, most conservative dispensational scholars would understand that there is a description going on here of actually Lucifer, Satan before he fell. And those who object say, well, this is directed at the king of Tyre. And I would respond to that by saying, yes, that's true. It's directed at the king of Tyre, but there are statements made to the king of Tyre that go beyond what could possibly be true of simply a human being. So, for example, if you go down to verse 14, we read, you were the anointed cherub who covers. The king of Tyre was not a cherub, and he was not anointed as a cherub. So something is going on beyond what was true of the king of Tyre himself. We read in verse 13 of Ezekiel 28, you were in Eden, the garden of God. Well, the king of Tyre wasn't there. Every precious stone was your covering, the sardius, topaz, and diamond, beryl, onyx, and jasper, sapphire, turquoise, and emerald with gold. Some suggest that because of this description that there was a prior creation, an extremely old creation of the earth, and some refer to this as a mineral garden. I don't accept that as a young earth creationist. I think that this is simply describing perhaps a part of the garden, a place where Satan was also had access to. I believe this Eden is the same as what we see in Genesis chapter 2. Another thing that is used to say that this was a different place, different time, an earlier time, was the statement in verse 14, you walk back and forth in the midst of the fiery stones. I don't see any reason why this cannot be part of the original creation. And remember this, an original early, a creation in the not too distant past. We know that there was volcanic activity, much of which is currently dormant. We also know that some of the geography was different, perhaps radically different, prior to the flood that we'll be talking about. So I don't see that there's a need for a contradiction here. Again, you were in Eden, the garden of God. You were on the holy mountain of God. And this would be God's holy mountain, his symbolic place of dwelling, I would say, perhaps here on the earth, and reflecting the symbolic holy mountain of God, the place of God's dwelling. What about the relative timing of the angel's fall? Well, if we go to Genesis chapter 1, back to Genesis chapter 1, at the end of the chapter, we read this. Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Now, old earth creationists would say that Satan's fall occurred in the very distant past, in this prior creation of the earth. But I think it's very difficult to suggest that God looked at everything he had made, which would necessarily include the prior creation, and say that it was very good if Satan had already fallen, had introduced sin into the world, and had swept a huge number of the initially holy angels along with him in his rebellion against God. So I would suggest that the fall of the angels could not have taken place yet by the end of the sixth day. So they were created on the first day, saw the creation of the physical universe, shouted for joy, and they were still in their holy state by the end of the creation week. In Romans chapter 5, verse 12, we read this, therefore, just as one man's sin entered the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men because all men sinned. So I would suggest that this death that entered into the creation was a result of the sin of Adam, but it's not separable in many ways from the sin that Satan and the other angels created, which ultimately led to the sin of man. And beyond that, it was then with the sin of man that death entered into the creation, which was perfect by the end of the creation week. And we also know that in the future, during the millennial kingdom, and ultimately in the new heavens and new earth, I would suppose, as Daniel was talking about in the previous session, things are going to change. People talk about, well, what about the dinosaurs and what about the carnivores, and how could they have not been carnivores at the time, and how could there have not been death of animals and man prior to the fall? Well, we know there's a time coming in the future when carnivores will know, those animals that are presently carnivores apparently will not be carnivores in the regeneration of the millennial kingdom as described in Isaiah 11. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like an ox. Certainly in our world, as we understand it today, a very strange situation, but apparently something that could have taken place in the initial creation. So again, going back to in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. I believe that those are connected together, all part of what happened during the creation week. Then thinking about the scope of the angels' fall. How many angels, of the holy angels that were created, what is the scope of the angels' fall? How many were involved? How many joined Satan in his rebellion against God? If you go to the book of Revelation, this is in chapter 12, talking about this is an interlude that contains elements from the past and elements from the future. The book of Revelation, I believe, is largely chronological, although it's not entirely chronological. I believe that the judgments are chronological and sequential, but there are interludes. And the way I describe this or explain it is, if you're watching a movie, sometimes there will be interludes where there are flashbacks and flash forwards to help you understand what you're seeing in the present. So John is seeing a series of visions, and so God gives him glimpses of what happened in the past so that he can understand what's going to happen in the future. So, for example, chapter 12 starts out, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then, being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. So most conservative scholars believe that this is a reference to the nation of Israel being the woman, the 12 stars representing the 12 tribes, and that she, being with child, the Messiah, Jesus Christ, the Savior, she gave birth. So this is about 95 years, roughly, 90 to 100 years prior to the time that John wrote this. So this is something that happened in his past. Another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. He drew a third of the stars of heaven. So I think this is a reference to the far distant past, and gives us an indication and gives John an indication of the scope, the magnitude of the rebellion against God, that 1/3 of the angels who were initially created as holy joined Satan in his rebellion. So it's a massive rebellion. And then moving into the future, after this, we're in Revelation 12, it talks about something that will happen in the future, and that is Satan and these angels, which have access to God based upon Job 1 and 2. They presently have access to the throne room of God, but during the tribulation period, they will be cast to the earth. So what about the identity of the sons of God? Going back to Genesis chapter 6, how does this all play together? Now, there are 3 main views related to this. One is the godly line of Seth, saying that the Daughters of men would be the line of Cain, with daughters born to the line of Cain, and the sons of God uh, uh, being in the godly line of Seth, the line of the Redeemer. So if you go to Genesis chapter 4, you see kind of a parallel going on. There is the genealogy of Cain and his descendants. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch, and he built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. And then in chapter 5, you have the 100 years, and he had, meaning Seth, he had sons and daughters. So you have two genealogies going on, and so some suggest that what you find in Genesis chapter 6 is the culmination, or at a point down the line in those genealogies. Also, we read, in going back to Genesis 4, there's a discussion of Seth. To him also a son was born, and he named him Enosh. And at that time, men began to call on the name of the Lord. So people put that together and say, okay, so now we're looking at the ungodly line of Seth and the godly line of the ungodly line of Cain and the godly line of Seth based upon this. Now, it is true that there are places when created beings other than angels are referred to as children of God, even in the Old Testament. If, for example, in Deuteronomy 14, chapter 14, verse 1, you are the children of the Lord your God. So it's referring to men, and so men say that, so there are some who say that the sons of God can be, in Genesis chapter 6, children and not necessarily angelic beings, as they are in Job chapter 1 and 2 and 38. However, I think you have a major problem with the view, this being the godly line of Seth, and that is this. In verse 5 of chapter 6, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And we know that God established in Genesis chapter 6, verse 18, we read this, that God established a covenant with you, meaning Noah, and you shall go into the ark, you, your sons, and your wife, and your slaves with you. Sorry, let me back up to that for a moment. So here's the problem. If the sons of God are the godly line of Seth, and they represent righteous men, then why is it that they were destroyed by the flood? Why is it that only Noah out of the line of Seth was saved, and not the entire line of Seth, if we're referring to them as the sons of God, in order to express the fact that they are descendants of Seth and represent righteous men and who married the unrighteous line of Cain? So I think there's a major problem. We could go into other things, but obviously we have to keep moving on. The second major view concerning the sons of God is divine rulers. So the sons of God saw the daughters of men. They were beautiful. There were giants on the earth in those days, verse 4, and those were the mighty men who were men of old, men of renown. So one question is, what is the antecedent, or what is being referred to when it says those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown? Some would say that the sons of God were mighty rulers who later in history began to be viewed by pagan religions, for example, as sons of God, in the sense that they were God's little g of the nation. We do find that the phrase, we do find that there are judges who are referred to with a phrase that is similar to sons of God, and we do know that there were mighty rulers that are given, or that rise up in history. One of the clearest examples is in 1 Samuel chapter 17, where we read this: a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. So that's over 9 feet tall. So this is a very large man, obviously. And so there are those who say that the giants of Genesis chapter 6 continued, and they can be seen even much later in the history of Israel. And one of the features of pagan religions is that the kings of the city-states, whether they be of the Philistines, the Canaanites, or the Egyptians, or the Babylonians, these kings were also seen as deities in the pantheons in these pagan religions. And in fact, we further read in 2 Samuel 21, verse 22, these 4 were born to the giant in Gath and fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. So here you have Goliath and 4 others who fell by the hand of David. And if you remember, David picked up 5 stones and he struck Goliath on that day, but it seems that he was prepared to take out the other 4 leaders. And it's interesting to note that the Philistines had 5 major cities. So each of these rulers, these you could say maybe demigods, were rulers of these cities. I think there's a better view. There's division or various ways of looking at this. I think this is probably the majority view, and that is that the sons of God are fallen angels. The sons of God saw the daughters of men. Then going down to verse 4, there were giants on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men. So we already saw that sons of God were angels in Job chapter 1, Job chapter 2, and Job chapter 38. And this specific phrase, sons of God, in the Hebrew only occurs in these 4 places. So I think that there is textual reason to think that these actually were angelic beings. And there are other textual reasons for holding to this particular view. Now, within that view, there are 2 major lines of thought. One is that the sons of God actually possessed men. And so we're talking about demonic possession. And so just as the king of Tyre is being addressed, but there's someone empowering him, which would be Satan, the fallen Lucifer, the fallen cherub. Same thing happens in Isaiah 14 with the king of Babylon. These are referring to angelic beings who empower and perhaps possess. We see possession in the New Testament, of course, in the Gospels and the book of Acts. We see that there is possession. So there are some who hold that view. There are others who hold what would be called the cohabitation view, and that is that angels actually took on the form, a physical form that looked and functioned as a human, although obviously not being the descendants of Adam, they were not actually human. I think there are several reasons to hold to this view, and we've already talked about Job chapter 1, Job chapter 2, Job chapter 38. So I think there's strong indication, very strong, and I would say the strongest scriptural foundation for believing that they're angels. Whether it was cohabitation or not, or whether it was demonic possession or cohabitation is another question. But I think the majority would hold that demons are involved to some degree. We do know that there's this concept of angelic beings taking on the form of a son of God or the sons of God. This is phrased a little bit differently, and there's some question about whether this is like a son of God or the son of God. there are those who would hold that this was actually the pre-incarnate Christ here in Daniel chapter 3, verse 25, as you know, that the three young men were cast into the furnace because they would not submit to Nebuchadnezzar's command concerning worship, and so they were cast into the furnace. And so there was a fourth person, some kind of being. So this concept is there in the Old Testament. We do see that. We also see it in Psalm 29. It's not exactly the same phrase as in Job 1 and 2 and 38 and Genesis 6, but we do see, even in Psalm 29, give unto the Lord, you mighty ones, give unto the Lord glory and strength. So there is another phrase, reference, it seems, to angels with this concept. There's also a concept of children of the Most High, again, not sons, but children, and it would seem that these are created beings that are not human. So there are references like this. We also see it later in Psalm 89, who among the sons of the mighty can be likened to the Lord. So whether this is talking about humans or angels is debatable. If there weren't a question about this, we wouldn't have a debate in the first place. Now, the identity of, and we'll come back to this angelic cohabitation a little bit later, the identity of the daughters of men. This one I don't think is too hard. The sons of God saw the daughters of men, and the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. So obviously these are humans. Whether they are strictly humans in the line of Cain doesn't seem to be, the text doesn't seem to require that. And so they are simply human women who have been approached by either men or angelic beings, but they are clearly human women, and I don't think there's any reason to think that they don't represent both the line of Cain and the line of Seth, since since everyone except Noah and his family were destroyed in the flood. Now, getting back to this matter of if this is cohabitation, or what is the nature of the sin that is going on, were there angels who actually cohabited, had sexual relations with women? What is the nature of the sin? So we know in verse 5 in Genesis chapter 6, the Lord saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Now, there are those who object, and there are some who strongly object to the idea of angels having sexual relations with men, and concerning the identity of the Nephilim, the giants in verse 4, there are those who say that God judged the earth because of the wickedness of men. Well, it is true he judged because of the wickedness of men, but is that the only thing that he judged? He killed all of the animals except 2 of each kind of animal, plus the 7 of the clean animals, of each kind of clean animal. So God's judgment extended beyond the wickedness of man, even though it was primarily because of the wickedness of men, and it was to destroy men from the face of the earth. So we need to be careful about how we make this argument about the extent and purpose of the judgment as it relates to men, and other things that may have been going on that precipitated the wickedness of men. What was it that caused men to be so wicked? And also we understand that these women bore children to the sons of God, and so this wickedness would have extended to their children as well. One of the objections to the idea of cohabitation or angels taking human women and having children with them is a passage in Matthew chapter 22, and I think it's also found in one of the other Gospels. But what we find is Jesus was being challenged about the resurrection by the Sadducees, who didn't believe in the resurrection. A woman had seven men in her life, and so they think they're going to trap Jesus by asking, whose wife of the seven shall she be in the resurrection, if there's a resurrection? So it's a mocking, facetious question. And then Jesus answered and said to them, you are mistaken, not knowing the Scriptures nor the power of God, for in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage. So there won't be marriage among humans in the resurrection, apparently, but they will be like the angels of God in heaven. And so the argument against the cohabitation view is that this is saying that the angels are incapable of having sexual relations, since humans will be like them and not be married in the resurrection. Well, that argument doesn't really work for a couple of reasons. For one thing, angels don't normally exist in a physical bodily form. So what Jesus is referring to is the normal situation, and he's also talking about the angels of God in heaven. Who are the angels of God in heaven? Well, this seems to be a reference to the holy angels, angels that did not sin. And if the angels in Genesis chapter 6 did sin, and we're going to see that it's whether it's demonic possession or cohabitation, the angels in Genesis 6 did sin, as we'll see in 2 Peter 2 as well as the book of Jude. The angels in Genesis chapter 6 are not like the angels of God in heaven. They are not like the holy angels. We do know this is being spirit beings, that is the normal form of angels. In Psalm 104, verse 4, we read that he makes his angels spirits, and that's quoted in the book of Hebrews. And so angels in their normal state, their created state, are spirits not having bodily form. However, we do know that angels multiple times took on a form that was human, at least in appearance. It wasn't actually human. They weren't descendants of Adam and Eve, but they did have human appearance. So, for example, in Genesis chapter 18, then the Lord appeared to him, meaning Abraham, by the terebinth trees in Mamre, as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. So he, Abraham, lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. And so we know from this encounter that there is the angel of the Lord from later in this chapter, and in the next chapter. The angel of the Lord is the one who is speaking to Abraham, the angel of the Lord being a pre-incarnate appearance of the eternal Son of God. But there are 2 other angels who are with him, and we know that they're angels because of what is said in the next chapter when they go down to Sodom and Gomorrah, and they find refuge in Lot, as the men of Sodom want to take these strangers who look like men. There was nothing about their appearance that would have distinguished them from men, and the men of Sodom believed that they were men. And then in verse 5, something interesting happens. Abraham says, I will bring a morsel of bread that you may refresh your hearts. After that you may pass by, inasmuch as you have come to your servant. So, what does this mean? What's the implication here? Well, sometimes I tell my students, sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is think logically. And I think we need to approach this with some logical thought. What was going on here? It appears that, one, these angels had fully the appearance of men, and I would also further suggest not only did they appear to me be humans, they had bodies that were functionally human, even though they weren't actually human. Why do I say that? Well, if they actually ate of that food, what happened to it in their mouths? Now, that may sound a little strange and a little trite, but it's a legitimate question. Either the food disappeared as soon as it entered into their mouths, or it began to be digested at the time that it entered their mouths. The digestion begins with chewing as well as saliva, and saliva is produced. We can take it all the way down to the genetic level. There's DNA involved with genetic processes, so there's a genetic process that ultimately ends up producing the saliva that begins the digestion process. Now, that may seem like, again, a trite or insignificant thing, but the point is this. If angels could take on a body, a physical form that was functionally looked like a human being and physically functioned as a human being, all the way down to the genetic level that allowed for digestion, is it not also possible that this could involve the DNA and the genetic processes necessary for procreation? It doesn't answer the question, but it does raise the question, and I think takes it out of the realm of impossibility. Then when you go to 2 Peter chapter 2, we read this. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, which angels who sinned? Are they the angels that were caught up, the 1/3 of all of the angels who were caught up that are described in Revelation chapter 12? Well, no, they can't be, because it says that these angels are cast down to hell and delivered into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment. But we already saw in Job chapter 1 and 2 that angels, the sons of God, appeared to Job, and most conservative scholars would put that around the time of Abraham, or maybe just a little bit before. So this is long after Genesis chapter 6 and the flood. So those angels still have access to the throne room of God, but it seems that there is a subcategory, a subgroup of angels who sinned, and those are being currently held in chains of darkness. They do not have access to the throne room of God. And Peter ties it to what happened at the time of the flood in Genesis 6 through 8. We read, and did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly. So there is a direct connection that Peter makes between angels who sinned and the flood of Genesis chapter 6. And those angels, those sons of God, are currently being reserved in chains of darkness. And then he refers to the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, that doesn't have a specific significance here in this particular context, but if you move over to the letter written by Jude, we see a reference to a reference that is similar to, and in some ways parallels, what Peter was talking about in 2 Peter 2. And this is what Jude writes in verse 6. The angels who did not keep their proper domain, that sounds like a sin, but left their own abode. That sounds like coming to earth from the heavens. And then we know it's the same group of angels, because he says he has reserved them in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. So it has to be the same group of angels. And here's where Sodom and Gomorrah comes in, that Peter references as well. Jude says this, as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them in a similar manner to these, having given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after strange flesh. So Jude makes a direct correspondence between angels who did not keep their proper domain, left their own abode, and are presently reserved. Same group of angels that Peter was talking about. He now says, Jude gives us further detail. Somehow these angels committed sin that was in the same category as what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, and that was in Sodom and Gomorrah human men primarily involved in sexual relations with other human men, a sin of sexual immorality. This is said of that subgroup of fallen angels. So again, I think there's a very strong case to be made here. Now, what about the identity of the Nephilim? Who are the Nephilim? Again, going back to Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, there were giants on the earth in those days. That is the word that is translated giant, but in other translations, it is translated as Nephilim. There were giants in the earth in those days, and we also see in the same word, Nephilim, is used in Numbers chapter 13. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to take a break here, if that's okay with you, Paul, and we'll get further into the Nephilim when we come back from a break, and we'll take questions after the end of the next session.
That was great. Thank you, Dave. Let's see.